The Pacific Ocean. In the early months of 1945 was a vast graveyard of ambition and sacrifice. Across its volcanic islands, the United States Marine Corps prepared for one of the most brutal campaigns of the Second World War, the assault on Iwo Jima. The island itself was little more than a speck of black sand and jagged rock, but its strategic value was immense. From its airfields, Japanese fighters could intercept American bombers on their way to Tokyo, and its underground fortifications promised a defense that would bleed the invaders dry. Into this crucible stepped thousands of young Marines, each carrying not only their rifles and packs, but also the weight of a nation's expectations. Among them was a man named Tony Stein, a former toolmaker from Dayton, Ohio, whose ingenuity and courage would carve his name into history. Stein was not the kind of soldier who fit the mold of a conventional hero. Before the war, he had worked with his hands, shaping metal and solving mechanical problems with the quiet patience of a craftsman. When he joined the Marines, he brought that same inventive spirit with him. Where others saw only the standard-issue weapons of war, Stein saw possibilities. He understood machines, their strengths and their flaws, and he believed that with the right adjustments, even a discarded piece of equipment could be transformed into something extraordinary. That belief would lead him to create a weapon that defied convention, a modified aircraft machine gun that Marines would later call the Stinger. The Stinger began its life not in a factory or an armory, but in the wreckage of a downed aircraft. The AN divided by M2 .30 caliber machine gun had been designed for the skies, mounted on planes where its blistering rate of fire could shred enemy aircraft in seconds. On the ground, however, it was considered impractical. It was too fast, too hungry for ammunition, and too unwieldy for infantry use. But Stein saw in it a potential that others overlooked. With his background as a toolmaker, he fashioned a custom stock, added iron sights, and attached a bipod to stabilize the weapon. What emerged was a gun unlike anything the Marines had carried before. Light enough to be man-portable, yet capable of firing up to 1,200 rounds per minute. In Stein's hands, it became a storm of lead, a weapon that could cut down enemy soldiers at a rate that seemed almost unbelievable. When the Marines stormed the beaches of Iwo Jima on the 19th of February 1945, Stein carried the Stinger with him. The black volcanic sand offered no cover, and Japanese machine guns poured fire into the advancing waves of Marines. Men fell by the dozens, pinned down by the relentless defense. In that chaos, Stein's weapon roared to life. The Stinger spat bullets with such ferocity that enemy positions, which had seemed impregnable, were suddenly silenced. Stein moved forward again and again, charging pillboxes and bunkers, his weapon blazing. Each time he ran out of ammunition, he sprinted back across the deadly beach, carrying wounded Marines to safety on his return trips. He did this not once, not twice, but 8 times, each journey a gamble with death. His comrades watched in awe, as Stein seemed to embody both ferocity and compassion, a warrior who fought with unmatched intensity, yet never forgot the lives of those around him. The Japanese defenders, hardened and determined, had built a labyrinth of tunnels and fortifications beneath the island. They fought not for victory, but for honor, determined to take as many Americans with them as possible. Against such an enemy, every inch of ground was paid for in blood. Yet Stein's Stinger gave the Marines a weapon that could break the stalemate. Where a standard rifle or even a Browning automatic rifle might struggle to suppress entrenched defenders, the Stinger's torrent of fire forced the enemy to keep their heads down, allowing Marines to advance. It was said that Stein's gun could kill 20 Japanese soldiers in a single minute, a figure that, while perhaps exaggerated in the fog of war, captured the sheer destructive power of his creation. Stein's actions on Iwo Jima were not just about the weapon he carried, but about the spirit he embodied. He was a man who refused to accept limitations, who looked at the tools available to him and imagined something greater. In the crucible of battle, that imagination became a force multiplier, turning the tide in moments where survival seemed impossible. His courage was not reckless bravado but a calculated determination, a belief that if he pushed forward, others could follow. For his actions, Stein would be awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest recognition of valor his nation could bestow. Yet his story was also one of tragedy, for the war that made him a hero would also claim his life before its end. The black sands of Iwo Jima clung to the boots of every Marine who stepped ashore, a reminder that this was no ordinary battlefield, but a place where nature itself seemed hostile. The volcanic grit swallowed their feet, slowed their advance, and offered no cover from the storm of bullets and shells that rained down from the Japanese defenders hidden in bunkers and tunnels. Amid this chaos, Tony Stein carried his strange, improvised weapon, the Stinger, and with it he carved a path through the inferno. Each burst from the gun was like a thunderclap, a stream of fire that forced enemy gunners to duck and gave his fellow Marines a chance to move forward. The weapon's roar was unlike anything the infantry had heard before, a sound that carried both reassurance and terror, depending on which side of the barrel you stood. Stein's comrades watched him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Time and again he sprinted across open ground, his weapon blazing, then returned carrying wounded men slung over his shoulders. He seemed tireless, though the truth was that every trip drained him. Every dash across the killing ground was a gamble with fate. Yet, he never hesitated. The Stinger gave him the power to silence enemy positions, but it was his courage that made him charge into the teeth of danger. In those moments, he was more than a Marine with a gun. He was a symbol of defiance, a man who refused to let fear dictate his actions. The Japanese defenders were not easily broken. They had prepared for months, digging tunnels deep into the rock, creating a honeycomb of fortifications that allowed them to appear and vanish like ghosts. They fought with a fanaticism that shocked even hardened veterans, launching counterattacks from hidden exits, firing from pillboxes that seemed impervious to bombardment. Against such an enemy, the Marines needed every advantage they could find. Stein's Stinger was one of those rare advantages, a weapon that could unleash such overwhelming firepower that even the most determined defenders were forced to yield. It was said that in the span of a single minute, Stein could cut down 20 enemy soldiers, a figure that captured the imagination of those who survived to tell the tale. But the Stinger was more than just a weapon. It was a testament to ingenuity under fire. In the crucible of war, necessity often gave birth to invention, and Stein's creation was a perfect example. He had taken a tool of the skies and reshaped it for the ground, proving that sometimes the difference between survival and annihilation lay in the willingness to think differently. His fellow Marines marveled at the weapon's effectiveness, but they also knew that it was Stein's skill and daring that made it truly deadly. In less capable hands, the Stinger might have been little more than a curiosity. With Stein, it became a legend. As the battle raged on, Stein's actions became the stuff of whispered stories among the men. They spoke of how he seemed to appear wherever the fighting was fiercest, how his gunfire cut through the din of battle like a promise of salvation. They spoke of his relentless determination, his refusal to rest even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, and they spoke of his humanity, of the way he carried wounded men back to safety, even when it meant exposing himself to enemy fire. In a war that often stripped men of their compassion, Stein held on to his, and that made his courage shine all the brighter. The cost of Iwo Jima was staggering. Thousands of Marines fell in the assault, and tens of thousands of Japanese soldiers fought to the death rather than surrender. The island became a symbol of sacrifice, a place where valor and suffering were etched into every inch of ground. For Stein, it was both the stage of his greatest triumph and the place where his story reached its tragic end. Though he survived the initial days of the battle and earned the Medal of Honor for his actions, he would not live to see the war's conclusion. His death was a reminder that even the bravest are not invincible, that heroism often comes at the highest price. Yet Stein's legacy endured. The Stinger became a legend among Marines, a weapon that embodied the spirit of improvisation and determination that defined the Corps. Though it was never mass-produced, its story lived on, passed down as a tale of what one man could achieve when he refused to accept limitations. In the decades that followed, historians and veterans alike would look back on Stein's actions as a shining example of courage under fire. His name joined the ranks of those whose deeds transcended the battlefield, becoming part of the larger story of a generation that faced unimaginable challenges and rose to meet them. Even today, the story of Tony Stein and his Stinger resonates. It speaks to the power of ingenuity, the importance of courage, and the enduring truth that in the darkest moments, individuals can make a difference that echoes far beyond their own lives. His weapon may have been forged from the wreckage of war, but his legacy was built on something far stronger. The unyielding spirit of a man who believed that no obstacle was insurmountable. And in that belief, he left behind not just a story of war, but a lesson in what it means to face the impossible and prevail. The battle for Iwo Jima stretched on with a relentlessness that tested every man who set foot on its shores. The island was small, barely 8 square miles, yet it became a world unto itself, a place where life and death were decided in seconds, and where courage was measured not in grand gestures but in the willingness to take one more step forward under fire. Tony Stein embodied that spirit. Each time he hefted the Stinger and advanced, he carried with him not only the weapon's devastating firepower, but also the hopes of the Marines pinned down around him. His bursts of gunfire were like a signal flare, a reminder that the enemy could be beaten back, that progress was possible even in the face of overwhelming resistance. The Japanese defenders had prepared for this moment with meticulous care. Their commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had ordered his men to dig deep into the volcanic rock, creating a network of tunnels and bunkers that allowed them to withstand weeks of bombardment. When the Marines landed, they found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to vanish into the earth, only to reappear in unexpected places. Every cave concealed a machine gun. Every ridge hid a sniper. The island itself became a weapon, and the Marines had to fight for every yard. In this environment, Stein's Stinger was more than just a gun. It was a tool that could break the deadlock, a weapon that could pour out such a volume of fire that even the most determined defenders were forced to retreat or perish. Stein's actions were not isolated moments of bravery, but part of a larger pattern of determination that defined the Marines on Iwo Jima. Again and again, men rose from cover to charge pillboxes, to drag wounded comrades to safety, to press forward despite the near certainty of death. Stein stood out because of the sheer audacity of his weapon and the way he used it, but he was also part of a brotherhood bound together by shared sacrifice. His story is inseparable from theirs, a single thread in the tapestry of valor that was woven on that island. The Medal of Honor he would later receive was not only a recognition of his individual heroism, but also a symbol of the collective courage of all who fought there. As the days wore on, the toll mounted. The Marines advanced yard by yard, clearing caves with grenades and flamethrowers, enduring counterattacks that came without warning. The black sands became littered with the wreckage of war. Shattered helmets, broken rifles, the bodies of the fallen. Amid this devastation, Stein continued to fight, his Stinger blazing, his determination unshaken. He seemed to draw strength from the very act of defiance, from the knowledge that every enemy position silenced brought his comrades one step closer to survival. His weapon was a marvel of improvisation, but it was his will that made it truly formidable. The legend of the Stinger grew with each passing day. Marines who saw it in action spoke of its terrifying rate of fire, of how it seemed to unleash a storm that no enemy could withstand. They spoke of Stein's fearlessness, of the way he charged into danger without hesitation. In the chaos of battle, stories spread quickly, and soon the Stinger became more than just a gun. It became a symbol of ingenuity and resolve. It represented the idea that even in the most desperate circumstances, a single man with the right combination of skill and courage could change the course of a fight. Yet Stein's story was not one of invincibility. The same courage that drove him forward also placed him in constant peril. Each dash across open ground, each assault on a fortified position, was a gamble with death. He survived longer than most would have expected, but the odds were always against him. When he finally fell, it was not because he lacked bravery or skill, but because war is merciless, and even the greatest heroes cannot escape its reach forever. His death was a blow to his comrades, but his example continued to inspire them, pushing them to fight on until the island was finally secured. In the years that followed, Stein's name would be remembered alongside the legends of the Marine Corps. His Medal of Honor citation told the story of his valor, but the men who had fought beside him carried with them memories that no official document could capture. They remembered the sound of the Stinger's roar, the sight of Stein charging forward through smoke and fire, the relief of seeing him return with wounded comrades slung over his shoulders. They remembered a man who refused to accept the limits imposed by circumstance, who believed that with enough determination, even the impossible could be achieved. The story of Tony Stein and his Stinger is more than just a tale of one man's heroism. It is a reflection of the larger truth of World War II, that victory was not won by machines or strategies alone, but by the courage and ingenuity of individuals who refused to give in. Stein's weapon was born of necessity, a product of a mind that saw potential where others saw only scrap. His actions were born of compassion as much as courage, a determination to protect his comrades, even at the cost of his own life. In that combination of innovation and sacrifice lies the essence of his legacy, a legacy that continues to resonate long after the guns of Iwo Jima fell silent. The struggle for Iwo Jima did not end in a single day, nor in a single week. It dragged on with a ferocity that stunned even the most battle-hardened Marines. Each sunrise brought with it the same grim reality. The island had to be taken, and the Japanese defenders had no intention of surrendering. The air was thick with smoke, and the acrid stench of gunpowder mingled with the sulfurous fumes rising from the volcanic soil. For the men on the ground, time seemed to blur into a continuous cycle of attack, counterattack, and desperate survival. In that crucible, Tony Stein's presence was felt like a force of nature. His Stinger was not just a weapon, but a beacon, a sound that cut through the chaos and reminded his comrades that they were not powerless against the enemy's entrenched defenses. The Japanese strategy was unlike anything the Marines had faced before. Instead of meeting the invaders at the water's edge, they had withdrawn into their labyrinth of tunnels and bunkers, waiting until the beaches were crowded with men and equipment before unleashing their fury. The result was devastating. Machine guns and mortars erupted from hidden positions, cutting down Marines in swaths. The black sand offered no protection, and the men were forced to dig shallow foxholes with their hands, clawing at the ground in desperation. It was in this environment that Stein's ingenuity shone brightest. The Stinger's blistering rate of fire allowed him to suppress enemy positions that would have otherwise pinned down entire platoons. Where others were forced to crawl forward inch by inch, Stein could unleash a torrent of bullets that cleared the way for his comrades to advance. Every time Stein charged forward, he seemed to defy the odds. He would sprint across open ground, the Stinger blazing, then vanish into the smoke as he stormed a pillbox or bunker. Moments later, the gunfire from that position would fall silent, and Stein would reappear, dragging a wounded Marine back to safety. His actions were not just acts of aggression, but of compassion. He risked his life, not only to destroy the enemy, but to save his brothers in arms. That duality, fierce warrior and selfless rescuer, made him a figure of almost mythic stature among those who fought beside him. They knew that as long as Stein was on the field, they had a fighting chance. The battle itself was a study in contrasts. On one hand, it was a display of the most advanced military power the world had ever seen. Naval bombardments that shook the earth, fleets of aircraft darkening the skies, and waves of Marines landing with precision and determination. On the other hand, it was a return to the most primal form of combat. Men fighting at close quarters, clawing each other from caves, and struggling for survival in a landscape that seemed designed to consume them. Stein's Stinger embodied that contrast. It was a weapon born of modern technology, yet it was wielded with the raw courage of a man who refused to yield.